and today I'm going to show you how to replace the VTEC Solenoid gaskets on a 95 Honda Accord. Now the solenoid is on the passenger side of the vehicle, right over here. This is the actual solenoid. Underneath it is the valve, and that bolts to the cylinder head. So there are two gaskets that can leak here. The first gasket is between the solenoid and the valve, which is underneath here, and the second one is between the valve body and the cylinder head, which is back here where the two made up. This isn't as easy as it may look. While you can get these three bolts off and replace the first gasket easily, the second gasket between the actual body and the cylinder head is a lot harder to get to because there are three bolts. One over here, and one way down here, which I can't even film. In order to get to those three bolts, you need to remove the water inlet housing, which is down here, which I'll show you later, which will give you access to get a socket in there and get out that lower bolt. So, let's begin. The first thing we're going to do to get access is remove the intake tube right here. And I have a little trick to make that a little quicker without having to go through the trouble of removing the intake snorkel and the top of the airbox. Just grab it and push it straight back. Now you'll see the cruise control cable is going directly over the intake tube here, so we're just going to pop it out of its clips and tuck it back. You'll see the two clips here and here. Just going to pop the cable out. Then we're going to just tuck it back behind the intake here so it stays out of our way.
Be careful when you bend the cable back. There's a plastic snout where it bolts to the cruise control actuator. If you bend the cable too much at that point, you could snap the plastic.
Now there's a few hoses and wires clamped to the intake tube itself, so let's pop them out. Pop out this vacuum line. Just pull that map sensor connector out, squeeze the tab, pull that out. Just going to tuck this back and out of the way. You have this little fresh air connection here, just pull it out.
Here's the throttle valve cable for the transmission.
Pop that out of that clip. Over here you have the fresh air side of the PCV. Just grab the hose and just pull it out. Over here is an air resonator. Inside here is a vacuum actuated valve that activates over 2,900 RPM to quiet the intake noise down.
And going to the actuator is this vacuum line.
So it's clipped in. You just want to unclip it from the intake tube. One clip here, one clip there. Now you want to loosen the intake clamp that holds the intake tube to the intake manifold. You want to loosen this thing as much as possible, otherwise the hose won't fully come off. No need to lose the screw, but just get it plenty loose. Now just grab the intake tube, pull it straight off. Now there's only one more thing holding the tube, and that's this flex hose, which hooks up to this resonator here. Loosen the hose clamp, pull it straight off. Now you can take the tube out. And that little effort, as you can see, gave us a whole lot more space to work in the area of the valve. So in order to get to the bolts for the VTEC valve, the next step is to remove the water inlet. That's this entire assembly here with the bleeder valve on it. First step is to remove the inlet hose to the radiator. I'm going to pull it out and tie it upright so I minimize the loss of coolant. So I'm going to put a drain pan directly under here, because when I do remove this hose and the inlet, a lot of coolant's going to come out. Got a catch pan here, and I have a funnel I put on top of it. Now you'll notice the inlet hose runs this way, under the distributor, and through a metal clamp right here. You want to pop the hose out of that clamp. Give it a little squeeze, just pop it out. Okay, now I'm just going to pull the hose out and then immediately hold it upright to prevent the loss of coolant from the rad. Now this hose is new, so it's going to pull off with relative ease, but if you have an older hose, it could really be stuck on there. Take a pair of channel locks, grab it, and then just wiggle back and forth to break that seal. I'm going to tie it in this position. Just got a piece of copper wire, wrapped it around the hose, just wrap that around the AC line, and that'll keep it up out of the way, and it'll keep the radiator from draining. Now you may be wondering why the coolant's not draining out of here. That's because the thermostat's back here, and it's closed since the engine's cold. The coolant's not going to start coming out until we remove the inlet assembly here. And when it does, it's going to drain up to this level, and all the other coolant in the vehicle is going to remain. I'm trying to minimize the amount of lost coolant. Now we want to remove this connector from the coolant temperature switch. Just squeeze this tab right here and pull it off. And to get a bit more slack to get this connector out of the way, disconnect the EGR level sensor here. Then you could take this and tuck it off out of the way. Over here, you'll see there's a wire loom which has a clamp which is bolted to the inlet housing. So we have to get this clamp off. Loosen this one 10mm bolt and just put this clamp off to the side. Now just grab the harness clamp, slide it off to the side. You have to remove this coolant hose that connects to the inlet assembly. Just get a pair of right angle pliers, grab the hose clamp, squeeze it and just move it back, release it. Just grab the hose and pull it off. Just tuck that up and out of the way too. You have two bolts holding the inlet assembly on. You have one right here and one over here. So you'll notice over here there's a pipe that enters the inlet housing. So there's a passage here and there's another passage in the back. So when you pull this out, you don't want to pull it straight back and out. You have to pull it at an angle to disengage it from the pipe. So you want to pull it like this. This harness also goes onto a bracket on the inlet housing. Just pull up on this clip and push it off. Just put it underneath where it'll be out of the way. Now just remove the two 12mm bolts. Now you just want to grab it and pull it up in this direction. To disengage it from that hose. Just gonna let it drain. There's one final clip that goes to the heater control valve right here that holds the hose in place. Just unclip it from that. Like that. Then you can just remove the entire assembly. And this was the clip that was holding that hose over there. So you just gotta disengage it from that. Now you'll notice that there are two seals that seal the inlet housing. There's one here, which is actually on the housing. And then there's an O-ring seal here to the inlet tube, which goes across the back of the engine and to the water pump. Both these must be replaced whenever you remove the inlet assembly. Okay, we're nearly there. Now we can actually get the VTEC valve off. We're going to start by removing the single wire connector, which goes to the solenoid. First, we're going to remove the connector from the bracket. There's a little clip you push here, that you can push down. Then to disconnect it, just squeeze the tab here, pull it apart. Now you can just tuck this connector out of the way. Okay, then right here you'll have the VTEC Solenoid oil pressure switch. Same as that other connector, just squeeze this tab and pull it off. Now I'm going to take this time to crack the VTEC pressure switch loose. It's a 22 millimeter hex on there. You could use a 22 millimeter deep socket or a 22 millimeter combination wrench. There's an O-ring back there that I'm going to change since I'm going through all the trouble of replacing the gaskets. It's not that much more to replace that O-ring. Just pop a 22 millimeter deep on there and just break that loose. Just thread that out. It'll also give you a bit more access when you're removing the bolts, because you don't want to break this. This thing is pretty expensive. And here you could see that O-ring. Before I go to remove the valve, I'm just going to take the opportunity to crack these bolts loose, because it could be a pain if you have the valve off. It can be on there pretty tight. Okay, I'm not going to remove that right now because there are parts of the valve in there and you don't want them to fall out. Now you can see one of the bolts holding the valve in place. There's one here. One there. And here's the third bolt that we had to remove the water inlet housing to get to. It's right over there. And unfortunately, you can't even get a combination wrench on it, because if you look closely, the distance between the bolt over there and the side of the valve is so tight that the thickness of a combination wrench will only allow it to get on the fastener crooked. So you won't have full grip, and all you'll end up doing is stripping out the bolt. The only way to get at that bolt is with a standard socket. And there's no way you're going to get a standard socket in there with the water inlet assembly in the way. Oh yeah, and also be very careful not to drop anything in there. Your life will become very miserable very quickly if you do that. As a matter of fact, just get a shop rag and just drape it over there loosely so that nothing falls in there. And even after all that work, the inlet pipe is still going to be in the way, so you're going to need a 10mm short socket and a universal joint. There it goes. And after years of being on there, they could be difficult to loosen up.
One more bolt left. It's a bit tight, but with a 1/4-inch ratchet and short socket, there's enough room to remove it.
Okay, and the valve will come right off. Try to keep any dripping oil out of the coolant, obviously. And finally, here is the VTEC valve. After all that, and all that just to change out one little gasket. This is one of those jobs where you think, you know, okay, I'm just going to remove these 3 bolts, pop it off, put a new gasket on and bolt it back. Well, in this situation, on this engine, that was simply not the case. Now you can see where the VTEC solenoid mates up with the cylinder head. I just lightly went over that machined surface with a shop rag. I was very careful not to get any of the grime and grit you see around it inside. That's a direct path into the engine's oil stream, and you definitely don't want that in there. Now, just as before, be very careful with getting anything in these passages. Again, you don't want grit and grime flowing through the oil in your engine. Gonna get a hook pick tool and just pick that gasket out very gently. This gasket is old and it's pretty hardened, so it may take some doing to get it out. Sometimes I like to have the hook pierce the gasket so I have a bite on it. Then I pry back, to press on the hook to make a hole in the gasket, then pry backwards. Try your hardest not to damage the sealing surface with the sharp edge of the pick. See, the gasket's actually cracking into pieces because it's old and hardened. But once you have a little piece of it out, you should be able to just put the pick on the open end and keep removing it. This part of the gasket also has a filter screen in it. You can see there's a steel mesh here. So make sure you get that out. The new gasket will have a new filter screen integrated into it. You don't want to accidentally leave this in there and then double up on it. Okay, old gasket's out. Now's the time to check that filter screen you just removed. This is another common cause of why VTEC won't engage. If the engine oil and filter weren't changed at regular intervals, this inlet screen gets plugged up with particulate. If the screen's clogged up, insufficient oil will flow through the outlet of the valve, and those synchronizing pins can't engage to actuate VTEC. Now that the gasket's all broken out, let's get that out of here. You can see this is pretty much hardened. Alright, here's our new gasket. Make sure the protruding part of the inlet screen is facing inside the valve. The cylinder head is machined flat, so obviously it wouldn't work if you put the gasket on in this direction. And the holes are different sizes, so you can't accidentally put the screen in the wrong port. So just put the gasket on, just push it into the grooves, and that's all. No RTV, no nothing. That's all. Just let the gasket do its job. Now we're going to go at the second gasket. I already broke these bolts loose before we removed the valve, if you remember. I'm just going to remove these.
The valve is spring-loaded, so keep your hand on the solenoid when removing the final bolt.
Just grab the valve and pull it off. And there's the second gasket. I'm just going to show you the inside of the valve. There are a few parts here, and that's the reason why you didn't want to remove the solenoid from the valve body while it was on the vehicle. You have this first piece here, which could easily fall out and get lost. Then you have the valve piston. And then you have a return spring. And then the valve's pretty much bare. And now with that removed, if you have to pry at this gasket to get it off, at least when you're tilting it or dumping it, parts don't start falling out that you don't know where they go. So now we're going to get this gasket off. Get the pick tool. Came right off. It got stuck to the flat surface of the valve body, but it could also get stuck in the groove of the solenoid as well. Same process, just get the pick, put it in there, pry the gasket out. Just gonna lightly wipe down the surface. Here's the new solenoid gasket from Honda. Let me go that one way, just pop it in there. All done. Let's reassemble the valve. Put the return spring in first. And the piston goes in with this grooved half facing up. Then you put this spacer piece back on. Then you should be able to press it down until the spacer piece is flush. And when you release it, the return spring should allow it to come back up. Before reinstalling the solenoid to the valve, dip my finger in clean engine oil. I'm just going to lube up this gasket. Now you can reinstall it. You notice this is like a triangle, but has this protrusion here, so it only goes on one way. You want it so the round portion in the solenoid lines up with this spacer in the valve. Now you're going to have to compress the two halves to compress that spring. Then get the bolts started. Just get one in, down all the way by hand, the rest of them pretty easy. Don't worry about tightening them. Do that when the valve is back on the vehicle.
The final step for the valve is to replace the O-ring for the oil pressure switch.
See, there's just an O-ring right here. Just sits there. Just remove it. Now I'm just going to take the new O-ring, dip my finger in a little bit of clean engine oil, and just put it on there. This will help the O-ring seal better and will prevent it from binding when we're tightening the oil sensor. Now, while the O-ring was stuck on the sensor itself, this is the groove where it goes. So put it right in here. Now obviously if it did get stuck in here, same thing, pick tool and then get it out. We're going to put the sensor back in now because this could easily fall out and get lost. Then you'll have an oil leak. Now we're going to take the sensor, just thread it back in, make sure that the O-ring stays in that groove. Just finger tight for now. Snug it up the rest of the way later. Now I'm going to dip my finger in oil again and pre-lubricate this gasket. Just a thin film of oil is all that's needed. Now we're ready to install the VTEC valve to the vehicle. Here's the water inlet assembly. And we have to remove this gasket in the back. So same deal, get the pick tool, just get it out of there. And that crud is just corrosion and coolant residue.
You definitely want to get all that crud out of there.
Okay, I just took my hook pick tool and scraped off as much residue as I could. Then I hit it with compressed air to blow away what I'd scraped off, being very careful not to get it inside. Just continue doing that, scraping off, compressed air. This is what I end up with. Okay, here's the new inlet gasket from Honda. Just take the new gasket, press it into the groove. Again, no RTV, no nothing. And now we're ready to install the inlet assembly to the vehicle. Now we're going to reinstall the VTEC valve. I'm going to put a bolt right there to help with alignment. I'll snug these bolts up. The torque specs, something like 8.7 foot-pounds, so there's no need to over-tighten. Just till they're snug. That's enough. Then just snug up that final bolt. Be sure to keep your socket straight on the bolt, otherwise you could strip the head. Now we're going to snug up the VTEC oil pressure switch. Pop a 22mm deep well socket on there. Again, it doesn't need much, especially with a 1/2-inch drive that I have here. It's very easy to over torque it, just until it's snug. That's it. Snug up the 3 bolts holding the solenoid to the valve. Same torque spec, something like 8.6 foot-pounds, so no need to over tighten these. Now I can remove the protective rag. And now here we have the final O-ring right there on the end of the inlet pipe. Just take this pick tool again, just get that O-ring off. Hook underneath like this, and then just pull it off. Now I'm just going to put the new O-ring on, just roll it on, start it at one side and just roll it on like that. Next thing I'm going to do is lubricate the O-ring. I'm just going to put my finger in the inlet pipe here. Make sure your gloves are clean, obviously. And then I'm just going to go around the O-ring, lubing it up. That'll help the O-ring slide into the inlet housing. I'm also going to take more coolant and lubricate this gasket as well. Alright, we're going to reinstall the inlet housing, the exact opposite of removal. All we have to do is make sure that we align this hole here right on top of the inlet pipe and then just press it down. I've got it loosely on the inlet pipe. Now remember what we did when we removed it. We have to make sure that that heater hose down there is inside that clip and not under it, or we're not going to be able to get it aligned properly. So I'm just going to pull it back. Alright, I'm just going to push the hose into that clip. It's in there. Now we can fully pop the housing into the inlet pipe. Just wiggle it, give it a push. You know you've pushed it far enough when the bolt holes line up with the threaded holes in the intake. Just thread in the two 12mm fasteners. Snug them up. Don't need to over tighten. The torque values are surprisingly low on these as well. Can't remember exactly what they are at the moment. I'm sure I'll put it up later. Let's get this connector out of the way. Let's get this harness back on this clip. Just line it up, press it until it snaps. This green connector that's shorter, so you can't reach up there to the temperature switch, goes to the VTEC pressure switch. So put that back in until it clicks. Swing this wire clamp back in place, reinstall the bolt. Let's retrieve those connectors we tucked away. Okay, the single wire one is for the VTEC solenoid. The 3-wire one is for the EGR lift sensor. And the green one with 2 pins for the coolant temperature switch. This goes to the VTEC solenoid. Go over here, retrieve that single wire. Press them together till they snap. Then hang it from the bracket on the distributor. Reconnect this coolant hose to the nipple on the inlet assembly.
Slide the hose down until it bottoms out. Then get your right angle pliers and reinstall the clamp.
Now plug in the EGR lift sensor connector. Just gonna untie the hose. Quickly bring it down and push it on to the inlet till it bottoms out against this stop right here. Just gonna bring the hose clamp back on now. Now the hose clamps on this side have a locking feature where they'll lock, just like you see here. It's very important to note that this clamp is not affixed properly. You'll see there are 2 claws here that are holding the clamp open. And the easiest way I found to release them and get them to spring shut is get a flathead screwdriver, place it right behind the claw area, and then just tap on it with the palm of your hand. Now you can see the clamp has released and it's in place. Now you want to guide the intake tube back into place. Just putting this vacuum line over here because it's going to clip over here. You want to clip this vacuum line into these 2 clips. Make sure that the hose is pointing upward like this before you attach it to the throttle body. Now you can pop the hose onto the throttle body. May be difficult to see, but you'll notice there are 2 teeth here. One there, and that will slot up and line up with this point here. That way you have it aligned properly so it's not twisted one way or the other. So push it on all the way now. And those two tooth alignment marks are exactly where they're supposed to be.
Now you can reinstall the flex hose to the resonator chamber.
Snug up the hose clamp. Then you can pop the vacuum hose back into its clips. Pop in the fresh air side of the PCV system. Pop in this other fresh air line. Get this connector for the map sensor. I want to pop it in this clip over here. Hook it up. Just pop it in the clip. Pop the vacuum line in this clip. Snug up the hose clamp securing the intake tube, throttle body. Now pop the other end of the intake tube into the upper half of the air box. Make sure the two arrows line up. That means you have the alignment right.
Reinstall the throttle valve cable to its clip.
You want the metal piece to be above the clip. Now put the cruise control cable back onto its clips.
You want the nut on the cable on the left side of the clip.
Just put the other side in. There's a third clip to put that vacuum line into. You have one here, two here, and the third one is right over here.
There's also a fourth clip over here. Whoever removed the intake tube before me didn't reinstall it.
So this is the routing of the line. There's clip 1, clip 2, clip 3, runs underneath the intake tube. And there's the final clip, clip 4. Pop the lower rad hose back into its clip.
Now just bleed the cooling system and you're done. Check my video on cooling system bleeding if you need those details.